Greetings, welcome back to Old Ways Rising Farm for a little bonus video. This is in addition to our weekly videos. But we're kind of at a place in one of the big topics that we've been dealing with on this channel, which is leatherwork. And we've done a whole bunch of leather tanning videos, trying to show all the different processes, steps of the process, common ways to work with non-toxic materials and natural materials and make leather. And we still have one project in progress, the bark tan. The very next video after this one to come up will be the first part of that, and then the second part is going to follow several months from now when the process concludes, because that takes a year and a day in order to get through bark tanning. It's just inherently a slow process. But that aside, we're going to kind of be moving out of the leather tanning focus to more of leather working focus with respect to the leather projects. Now, of course, this is a broad-based skill building, general homesteading channel. We're not going to be an all leather work channel. And there's quite a few other projects and agricultural topics I'm going to get to before we get to that. So I thought this would be an opportune time to kind of put this little extra video in as sort of a bookend in between those two different topics. And talk a little bit about sources of information for leather work, leather tanning, etc. And there's two different brackets here, modern work and historic work. Modern work, fairly easy to access. You can go get books, just two I have handy here. Deer Skins into Buckskins by Matt Richards, right? That's a modern book that you can just go Google and buy a copy. It's available, right? Another one, Leather Braiding by Bruce Grant. This is a lot of good stitches for thong work and doing those sorts of things. When you're sewing buckskin, you want to sew with a leather thong rather than thread. There's quite a few good patterns in here for different stitching methods. So you can just go and get these modern sources. But if you want to really dig in to the old school traditional methods of working with leather, understand the stone tools, the bone tools, and the full diversity of leatherworking across world cultures. Okay? Yes, books like this will cover some of that, right? We'll have, this book does talk about some bone tools and some pre-modern ways of working with buckskin. But to get a full, broad, diverse survey of that, you've got to go into the historic literature. Okay? That's what I want to mostly talk about here, because it is abundant, but it's a little convoluted. Okay? The reason is that most of these historic topics were covered in great detail around the turn of the century, the second half of the 1800s and the first half of the 1900s. Ethnographers were starting to realize that there was value in going and observing what was at that point their grandparents' generation, people who lived and had experienced the late 17 and early 1800s, okay, and recording how they interacted with the world, and that there was value in recording that. The problem is that they did it mostly by culture group or by geography rather than by skill set. Okay, so this is the first problem with this old work. So these are fortunately available and getting more and more available all the time from libraries, from academic libraries, and from groups that are starting to digitize this old information. Because most of this era's work that is not currently available and just purchasable has already passed into the public domain. Okay? And every January, a new set of works pass into the public domain. When that happens, a lot of libraries are scanning them. You have Project Gutenberg that's doing this. You have archive.org has a ton of this stuff. You have even Google Books doing a lot of this. So the ability to access and read these historic texts is exploding exponentially. But you still have this problem of they are largely categorized by you'll have titles like yada yada observations on such and such locality people. Okay? And the title isn't going to tell you what the observation is, just the people group, the tribe being observed, the location where people were being observed, the archaeological site, not what was found, what was observed, what skill sets are being described. So in order to work through this material, you have to go in and read, or skim at least, just oodles and oodles and oodles and oodles and oodles and oodles of stuff which doesn't relate to exactly what you want to talk about for this example, tanning of skins. But in each of those books, there's maybe a paragraph that's useful, or a chapter that's useful, or maybe even a section of chapters that's useful. Okay? But you have to go through all of this other stuff to find it. The other set, specifically with leather tanning, the other set of works that are available, and again have passed into the public domain, are works related to industrial leather tanning as it existed in the late 1800s and early 1900s. But most of that information is about how to set up a steam engine to run a tumbler, and is really not that useful to somebody who wants to tan a couple of buckskins in their backyard. Okay? So, but there still are gems in there, right? There are what sources of bark are being used, what materials are being used, order of operations and process is still useful, even if the materials, techniques, and descriptions are obsolete and irrelevant to somebody who just wants to, tan the hide off the trophy buck that they got yesterday, right? So again, it's another nice source of info on leather tanning, but has to be sorted. Third problem with these historic texts is profoundly colonizing and insulting language, right? It's like, back in those days, people couldn't dream of writing a sentence. Seems a lot of people couldn't dream of writing a sentence without a racial slur in it. So that's problematic to read. We want to preserve the knowledge. We don't want to preserve some of history's worst ideas. Okay? So we want to take the best and flush the rest. And this is to talk about a project that I'm working with, that I've been working on and want to share with you, that I call the Scholar Scrapbook of Ancestral Skills. Because I've been doing exactly what I'm describing to you. And putting together compilations. This is my first attempt at bookbinding it. Some things worked out well, some not so well. But I'm going to use it to show you what I'm talking about. I've been putting together compilations of these historic texts. This is the first volume of the series, has to do with woodworking, where I'm cross-referencing them by use category and skill. Okay? Going through all of these, pulling out, oh, this paragraph is good for woodworking, and this paragraph relates to leather tanning, and this paragraph relates to working with furs, and this paragraph relates to carving a bone or a shell, or, etc. I've been splitting them, and I've got about a dozen of these volumes that I'm working on simultaneously. Several of those are ready to go, several of those are not. But the first one on hide tanning is. And I'd like to show you a little bit about what's in it. So this is just an example, the fourth volume of this scrapbook series on rawhide, buckskin, and bark tanning. I'm doing each of these first starting with, I just call it compiler's notes, where I'm adding context and describing any changes or edits that have been made, such as reformatting photographs, if I've changed size on anything. And I mentioned that colonizing language, I'm decolonizing it, right? It's really easy if somebody says, and I observed the insert racial slur doing something, to just write, and I observed the people doing something, right? It doesn't change anything. It makes it a whole lot nicer to read. So I do mark where I have edits and describe any edits I've been making, but we're taking some of the worst of the nasty language out of it. Mm-hmm. And I'm then also formatting these for pamphlet folding. so if you look at this block, right, page 1 and 20 together, and if I flip it over, page 2 and 19, this is so that we can take these, we can stack them, and we can fold them into a nice little signature for a bookbinding project, as I mentioned here. Okay. If I just flip through this first one, we have editor's notes, description of what's in the volume, and then all the different things in here. Home tanning and leather making from 1922. I pulled about 6 chapters out of there. And then here, these are those sorts of works that I was describing that have a little bit and piece that relates to a whole bunch of different ideas, right? Excerpts from the North American Indians of 1810. Excerpts from notes on Shoshone ethnography. Excerpts from material culture of the Blackfoot Indians, right? You have all of these different ethnographies looking at a specific people and what they're doing. And in this volume, I'm just pulling the little excerpts which relate specifically to something about leather tanning. Okay, and I've organized this. There's the first section is all about process, different ways of tanning the leather, and then example projects. So in here, there's a lot of material on how different types of clothing were made. There's some, and as much of a world view as I can, like wide world view as I can put together. Most of what I have access to relates to North America, but there's European stuff where I can find it, and other stuff from other areas of the world where I can find it. There is a North American bias because of the information that I personally have access to as a person in North America. But that's a circumstantial bias, not something that I chose. And, you know, we have different ways of making clothes, excerpts from Native American bows, arrows, and quivers, an 1894 book where I have leather quivers described. Excerpts from costumes of the Plain Indians, a lot of work on clothing in there. And then at the end we have a lot of things, a lot of sources that are just about tools. Some of this is archaeological, bone tools, stone tools, wooden tools, needles, different ways of making needles for sewing leather, making awls out of different non-metallic stuff, needle cases, all of that sort of thing is in here. And then as we're going through, this is all retyped so that it prints nicely. And just to find something with some good pictures in here. The pictures to, like there's an example. The pictures are digitally remastered to the best of my ability. Now things that were a woodblock print like this or a line drawing, this goes very, very well. Pictures that were more of a photograph come out a little bit grainier, right? So you can compare these two. The photograph a little bit grainier, but still set up as best as I am able, whereas something that was a block print, I can clean up very, very nicely and have a very good, easy to print resolution there. So, if this is of interest to you, it is available free to all patrons of this channel. And Patreon works when you upload a file like this, they will list it for sale, but then I can also say how I want that to interact with patrons of the channel. So I have said in my Patreon that everybody at every level has free access to this material. And the lowest membership tier included, which is $1 a month, and these are set for sale at $12. So you might as well just go and join if you want it, because then you can get updates. Because we're doing other things. This is also up there already. Plans for these little belt bags. Okay. And as we go through more projects and I get more of these compilations put together, the content will build. So I want to try and encourage people. I don't want to just sell copies of this. I want to try and build a community here at Old Ways Rising Farm, participating people, and let you have access to these as we continue to build the repository. I want you to be able to keep access going through. As things are edited, as new things are added, if you join, you'll just immediately have free access to all of that. So if this is of interest to you, go ahead and check out our Patreon, link in the description below. I hope that some of this information is of use to you, and I hope that we'll see you here around in our upcoming project videos at Old Ways Rising Farm.